Okay, so I sent you guys out an agenda earlier this week, but I do kind of want to let you know what we're going to do today. I am going to quickly kind of go through what is public art, why is it important, and why is Renew Moline leading a public art master planning effort for downtown Moline. After that, we're going to let you guys ask some questions. You guys are more than welcome to ask us anything and everything. Josh and I are both planners. We went to grad school for planning. I went to grad school for planning. Josh has an undergrad in planning. He's rolling his eyes. But
just as good.
Just as good. We have been doing this work for a while, and I know if you guys are in this class, you're passionate about the same things that we are, and we're happy to answer any questions about planning and public art and public space or any of those things. So just let us know. Before we get started, are there any questions about, how the day's gonna kind of play out, or anything else? And again, I have the chat box open, so feel free to butt in and raise your hand, or whatever you want to do. Meant to be casual as can be online.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And when I share this window, you will be knocked out of what you're doing because I am going to share it full screen. But I think you can go back in and tell it to reduce the window size, correct?
Yeah, once it comes up full, yeah. And you should be able to do fit to window.
Okay, and I'm going to bring that to the top. Okay.
If anybody is an expert in Zoom already, good for you, but we're taking some time.
We're learning.
Okay, yep, we can see it.
Okay, awesome.
We're good.
All right, cool. Okay, so as you know, we are working on the Downtown Moline Public Art Master Plan. And when we start these conversations, it's important for us to kind of take a step back and introduce people to what public art is and how it lives in the public sphere, and how it lives in different communities. So when I usually ask this question and I'm in a larger setting, people are like, I love to see, or I think public art is men on horses. And when we think about that, all the men on horses I've ever seen are usually white. They're usually men. There are no women on horses. So, that's not something that resonates with me. People usually talk about monuments as public art. A couple of years ago in Richmond, Virginia, a community said, how can we begin to memorialize people who have done great things, right? So these big monuments of men on horses are perceived to be great community members, leaders who have done great things for our cities and our country. But now we're realizing that that's not true. And so in Richmond, the community decided that they wanted to commemorate Maggie, who was a leader in the African American community who helped teach African Americans how to read. And this is a new prominent corner park in the center of Richmond, and they wanted to memorialize someone different. It's really interesting too, because the artist who created this sculpture is also an African American woman, which is really fantastic because a lot of times sculptors are usually men. So this is a really cool way to commemorate something that's not normally celebrated. Public art can also change things from mundane into interesting. This is on the back of a parking garage in Tacoma, Washington. And this community was specifically interested in engaging these super boring walls into something that looked different. And as you can imagine, these are just stucco walls in the back of a parking garage that would otherwise be kind of dirty, similar to the cinder block walls on the left. But this artist wanted to commemorate and celebrate the public works workers who actually were working in this building. And so the muralist did large-scale paintings of these people. This is something that's super cool in New York. It's on a bus line. If this image were to be backed up, it's a pixelated image of a face. And this artist rode the buses for a month and decided that they wanted to celebrate the people who were riding these buses. And so the artist depicted these people's faces on the fence in this way. Very cool. So suddenly something that's, you know, kind of boring, ugly, utilitarian chain link fence has now become a place and a gallery of faces. Public art is also unexpected. These rabbits are super interesting to me. If I were to see this in a place, I would want to go touch those. I would want to know if they're soft. How are they being held up? Is there an air blower in the bottom? Where is it located? Do they light up at night? I would come back, and we can look under these rabbits and understand that these pieces are temporary. They're not permanent, and they're temporary on a very utilitarian space. This looks like a very flat concrete space. Something that is usually very boring has now become something that's very interested and very intriguing to people. This woman wanted to have her photo taken. I would say that I probably wouldn't want to have my photo taken as well. I had to put this in there because you guys are on a river, and I had to put some images of public art on a river. This is in Columbus, Ohio, where Josh and I live. And this is a Terry Allen sculpture. And when he came to do his artwork in Columbus, he said, I want to make sure that I'm doing something that is very special to Columbus and that's unique to Columbus. And so Terry began to explore what the definition of Scioto was. And Scioto is the name of the river. Scioto literally means hair of the deer. And so he decided to put deer in human positions all along the riverfront. There are 3 pieces. This one, I would say, is the most prominent and most beloved. And at any given time, you can go on this bridge and see people with their arms around the backs of the deer. In the winter, he has a scarf on. At Christmas, he has a little Rudolph nose. People love this deer. And if you go on to Instagram or Facebook and you type Columbus, this is one of the images that you'll see most often. So public art also becomes synonymous with the brand of a place if done well. Public art can also be functional. So have any of you, I know you can't tell me, so I have been to San Jose Airport. This is in San Jose, California, and Christian Moeller did this installation. This screen actually wraps a parking garage. So he decided that he wanted to take photographs of all the people's hands that were coming and going from the airport, and they're kind of waving, kind of like a queen's wave, and they just subtly move. And because of where it's placed in the rental car facility, you don't know if the hands are waving hello or goodbye. But you can imagine if this screen wasn't there, how boring the parking garage would be. Public art can also be functional on a very small scale. So the city of Pittsburgh launched a really cool, what was very kind of on the leading edge of public art and functionality about 10 years ago. And they had artists actually design bike racks. So this is a low cost, small intervention of public art on the sidewalk that would allow people to use the public art. So they actually hired 20 different artists to create public art bike racks and place them throughout the city. So there are some that are the giant bridges from Pittsburgh, and they're kind of, you know, put out all over the sidewalk. It's been interesting to kind of read about these and understand that people think they're sculptural and that they're not functional. So you hardly ever see bikes attached to them, which I think is pretty funny and interesting, considering their intent, and their design intent was to be a bike rack. Public art can also increase safety and enhance things and make them more beautiful. So this is in Birmingham, Alabama, and as many highways do and have done, historically have, you know, separated neighborhoods, usually from their downtowns, because as you know, during the highway movement, people wanted to place highways through downtowns to get people quickly through these cities. And Birmingham is no different. And so this very large overpass separates downtown Birmingham from what is now an African-American neighborhood. And before this installation, it was perceived that people wouldn't go under the overpass under the underpass because of how dangerous it was. And so the city said, okay, let's just have an artist help us think about how we can increase safety under here. And this was before this was happening often. And so the artist said, well, let's just do some really awesome lights and just see what happens. And so the artist, this is called Rainbow Road, and it's in Birmingham again. And the artist actually did just a rainbow installation of lights. And now you can see that people are going under there. It feels safer. And if this image were to back out, you would see that this is a girl and her dog posing for a picture on a column, right? So, you know, if something was very dangerous, people weren't posing on a very boring underpass. But now people are posing and posting and celebrating that, you know, they're walking under this underpass. It's iconic for Birmingham. So why does public art matter in communities? When we're talking about public art in communities, we're talking about adding specific things to increase the quality of life. So we find that public art creates unexpectedness. So when you go to a place and you always kind of know what to expect, people hardly ever return. So this is in Montpelier, Vermont. This is on an alleyway, and the alleyway kind of is in between two very popular streets, and this alleyway is closed to pedestrians. So people are walking back here. They have storefronts on this alleyway, but they're not the primary storefronts. So this artist decided to use the utility poles in the backs of these buildings to create what they like to call the Montpelier jungle. And they have these different wheat pasted animals that change and rotate. So the vines are actually painted on the building, and then the different animals are wheat pasted on, and they change often. This artist, his name is DJ Barry. He also likes to paint these cows all over the buildings in Montpelier. It's not something that's allowed, but it's celebrated there because it's part of their culture and they love it. Public art also creates interesting spaces. If I were to see this, you know, I immediately would be like, who dropped that ball between those buildings? I think I would want to go under it. I would want to see how big it was, how far back between those buildings it went. I would want someone to take my photograph. And I think, you know, as a middle-aged, I'm not middle-aged, a young woman, I guess, you know, that captures my imagination. So imagine what it's doing for younger children. And I also think that the same reaction would be felt from someone who's older, right? So public art also creates interesting things for us to want to interact with. And you can imagine if that ball weren't there, you may just walk past that alleyway and be like, cool, alleyway. I'm not necessarily drawn into that space. And ultimately, what cities are talking about public art and why they're investing in public art, both from a planning perspective and also as a capital expenditure, are because of the economics behind public art. This is a friend of ours, Janet Evan, who is a really fantastic artist, created this piece to hang over a roundabout. This specific city felt that this roundabout was boring, and they wanted something to look at. What they didn't anticipate was that this would become a public space. So you guys, I hope that you heard me. This is the center of a roundabout. It's not meant to be a park, but people are hanging out under here. And I think that just shows, okay, we put a piece of public art here. If it's done well, it creates public space by itself, which is really interesting. But the most important thing that we're talking about here, economic drivers, interesting places, changing mundane things to interesting, all of that amounts to really celebrating this outward expression of community values. So I'm from Georgia, and I lived in Atlanta before I moved to Columbus. That was the last city that I lived in, and this is in Atlanta. And so we could talk about all these different shared values of like, yay, go sports teams or whatever, but that's not something that resonates with everyone. In Atlanta, everyone hates traffic. I'm sure there's not one person who would say that they love it. And this piece is hilarious in my mind. I'm like, is that a mouth swallowing a car? I don't know, but I love it. And all Atlantans can get behind it and say, yes, I love that mouth is swallowing that car on this prominent corner. Very cool, very interesting, and very different, and not something that people would necessarily love, you know, out in the middle of Iowa, right? Where there's not a lot of traffic. They'd be like, okay, that's weird and interesting. But that's not a shared value. They don't collectively hate traffic because it doesn't exist. So it's an interesting way to do that. And so we're trying to accomplish some of the same things that we are outlaying here in this presentation. And so our process started in December. We began talking to different stakeholders who were kind of given to us by Renew Moline and some of the city staff and our steering committee. And they said, hey, here are the leaders in our community who we think have great ideas for public art and can really provide both a vision for public art in the future, but also a vision for the city and how you guys can come in and understand how public art can fit into that vision. And we came in January. We got to meet a bunch of folks, take a tour of the city. I did not get to go across the bridge, which I've been promised that's going to happen, and hopefully COVID finishes up because I really want to ride across the bridge. But we spent time getting to know you, because in our line of work and in your future line of work, everything that we do is about listening to communities and understanding their local context, because without that, you can't really create solutions for the things that you're looking for. We also created a website, and I hope that you've gone to it, or it's a web page on the existing Renew Moline site. And if you want that, it's renewmoline.com/public art. We hope that you'll go there. The survey link is there, and we want you to contribute in those ways. The second task, which is where we're at now, is really about developing the community engagement and making sure that we're providing opportunities that a lot of people can participate in varying ways. And this has become even more important in this work specifically, because we all know we're in really uncertain times. And so we're unsure about when we can actually physically gather together. And so, we've pivoted to some online engagement, and we're actually getting some really good participation across all of our projects, because people are really hungry to interact with one another and really hungry to talk about things that matter to them. So I really appreciate all of you being here, because without your voices, the plan is really just a plan that, Josh and I write, that's not informed by these community values. After this kind of section of our planning work, we're going to be thinking about what it is that Moline believes that they are, because we find that a community character framework helps us understand how to frame Moline to public artists who are coming to create artwork for Moline. Without that, artists are coming in cold. They don't know what those community values are, and we find that artists are very inspired by voices from the community. And so we're seeking to kind of take all of that information in. Who is Moline? Who are the Quad Cities? Bring that together into kind of a concise couple of statements, and then to be able to give that back to artists so that they can actually create work that's informed by who you believe that you are. From there, we're going to develop some core recommendations about moving a public art program forward. And then we're going to think about how to get community buy-in. And that's not just about finding consensus about locations to place artwork, but it's also about who are we, who do we want to become? Do we want, part of our destination package to be about public art? And then tasks 4 and 5 really are about submitting that draft plan, making sure that it does reflect the community well and does reflect the desires of leadership in the community. We also hope that we're out of the woods with this situation and we're able to come back and physically present the draft plan to the community, because again, it's really important to us that the community says, yes, this is what we care about. We believe that this is where we want to head. And we want those partners to say, I'm behind this vision. And then from there, we are hoping that council will adopt this plan and that it will become part of their code so that public art can be integrated into all new development, both private and public. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then allow you guys, if you're interested in asking questions about the planning process before we move on to our exercise. You're muted.
Feel free to ask your questions either in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask questions or raise your hand, whatever works best for you. And we're available after this too if things pop in your head We can give you our emails and our phone numbers if you'd like to chat. We're happy to connect to answer any additional questions.
I guess I have a question. Oh, well, Ha has one. Maybe we'll.
Yeah, so the question is, what inspires us to become planners, and why public art for both of us? You want to start, Amanda? Or you?
Sure. I'm from Georgia, and I was originally an anthropology major at Berry College, and I also was there on a vocal and piano scholarship. When I realized that I wasn't the best in my music classes and that I wasn't going to be able to make a living and that I was going to a very expensive school, I realized that I needed to kind of shift and do something that had value. I was very interested in community development, but at that time there were no planning programs in the state of Georgia. And so I was fortunate. Actually, my husband got offered a job. We decided to move to Ohio, and they had, one of the best planning programs in the country. And so I was able to enroll at Ohio State and finish school here in Columbus. I think that what inspired me to become a planner is different than what inspired me to become a public art planner. From a planning perspective, I was very interested in how people are engaged with the spaces that they live in and engage with each other. So what does community look like? And anthropology was kind of a start at that, but it wasn't planning. That was just studying who people were and how they moved. Once I got into school and having an artistic background, I really realized that without arts and culture, the things that we were doing were kind of dry and sterile. And so Ohio State offered a creative placemaking certification through Rutgers, and I took the class. I thought it was very interesting and really informative and really kind of transformed how I perceived planning and arts and culture to fit together. And so Josh and I were friends in school, and I said, I don't really want to be a traditional planner who does comprehensive planning. Let's like think about how to be creative. And so together we were like, let's start a firm. So we asked folks that we knew if they thought it was a good idea. Some mentors in the community, everybody said that's stupid. Nobody will ever pay for arts and culture consulting. We were young and also stupid, and said, we'll do it anyway. And we did, and here we are. And people are paying for it because they recognize the value of arts and culture in our system and in our world.
Yeah, and for me, I was always sort of interested in history and things like that. I grew up in the country, I grew up outside a small town here in Ohio. And so I didn't really have a sense of like anything city-wise. I was just always really interested in history and that kind of thing. And then when I was at OSU, I happened to be friends with somebody that was majoring in architecture. We wanted to take a class together, and planning was one of the classes that I counted for whatever the major I was in, and for architecture. So we took it, and I was like in love with it. So that's kind of how I got into planning itself. And then just the more I took planning classes, the more I realized it was just like all things that I was really interested in. And then in terms of the public art, I mean, I think for both of us, Amanda kind of told you a little bit of the background. I think we certainly approached planning from the creative standpoint. So public art isn't the only thing that we do. We also do historic preservation work. We do placemaking, and then public art and cultural planning, and all those kind of things. They all, to us, they all go together. So whether it's, not often do you see like a art, culture, and historic preservation plan, although there are some of those. There's a few of those around. But for us, certainly we think these things kind of all tie in together. And so whether we're working on a historic preservation project, and there's so much of so many cultural things that go into that, even if we're just working on a building, versus a public art project, where again, it's a lot of this like kind of cultural background and history of the place, inspires a lot of artists. And we, work directly with them on that sometimes. So, for us, it's kind of like this sphere of cultural and historic and artistic things that all go together in planning. And so it's very interesting for us.
I also think that as we've kind of gone on in our practice, we're quickly realizing, and also just with everything that's happening in our world today, barring everything that's happening with the coronavirus, but in our conversations, we have realized how much people don't see themselves in the places that they live. And I think that makes our work ever more important, and even more important as we move forward into our future, because I believe, and I think Josh believes, that the only way to make sure that everyone feels included and comfortable and safe and heard and seen and all those things that we all want to feel is to experience things in our built environment that reflect us. And so public art and historic preservation and oral history and public space design, all those things are opportunities to make those things happen. And I think that our job is really unique in that we're in a position to constantly be asking those questions to the cities that we're working for.
It's a great question. Others? I know, Chris, you were going to ask something.
Anybody else? I guess my question would be, how often do you work in smaller cities like Moline, and are there any major differences that you see when you do a project in a small city as opposed to some of the big cities you mentioned?
What's the actual population of Moline?
It's right about 40,000. The metro area overall is about 300,000.
It's funny. I think around 40,000 is sort of like the median size of communities that we work in, probably. We work in places, so we've worked in citywide plans. I think the largest one we've done is probably around 300,000 people for an entire citywide plan. We've worked in Columbus doing an area specific plan, and Columbus is around 800, 900,000. But we've been working a lot lately in cities of like probably 100 to 300,000. So some of these are standalone places like Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is it's sort of like same size as the Quad Cities. And then Akron, Ohio, that's around 200,000, but kind of similar, overall metro size. But then there's a lot of like these suburbs or suburban style places in the Sunbelt areas that we've worked in. So we're working in this large city of around 200,000 people in Florida right now. We've done Texas, Arizona, Atlanta. Yeah, how can I forget Atlanta? A lot of these places that are like fast growing suburbs. So I would say the majority of our work is in these faster growing suburbs. And, to be honest with you, the reason that is, I think, is because they have a lot of money. So they are looking to do these kind of things, and they're approaching it from a different standpoint than places like Moline and Fort Wayne and Akron, which is, they're still growing, but not to the same extent. And they're really looking at it as an opportunity to help revitalize their communities. So I think there's definitely a dichotomy between places that are looking to, I would just say places that are rapidly growing and places that are looking at it as an opportunity to kind of reinvest in their community. And we've worked in very small places too, even much smaller than Moline.
We worked in Montpelier. They had 6,000 people. That was a very intense experience, primarily because everyone's so bought into everything that happens there. So everyone wanted to be included.
We're working in a city in Colorado called Glenwood Springs. It's around 10,000 people. So kind of similar, like everyone knows everybody. In some ways, it's easier to do engagement in those smaller communities, because they're so tight knit that, you know, I think the smallest place we've ever worked and done engagement was about 5,000 people, and we got like 1,000 survey responses.
Wow.
Because every single person knows each other, and they were like posting it in their Facebook, and like they know everybody in the community, and everyone's bought in because it's a little tiny town. But when you get into places with like 300,000 people, like suburbs, and most of those people aren't from there, have no real connection to the community, except for that like they bought their house there because it was affordable for most of the places that we're working in, or like desirable. They don't really have a lot to say, or even know that anything is happening. You know, it's kind of like happening out here. So it's definitely, can be more encouraging to work in places where there is that like, you know, tight knit, or like there's a lot of care about their community there. Sometimes, you know, it's, so in those other places, we're really trying to build that community connection, because they don't really have a history of that. And then in the other places, it's like Fort Wayne, I think, would be an example of a place that we had a lot of people that were like, the engagement there was fairly easy because people wanted to participate. I mean, we got like hundreds of people out to our large scale meetings every time. And they were just like, they were just so, I don't know, tied into the things that the city was doing there, that they really wanted to participate. You have more to add, Amanda?
No.
Other questions? Like I said, we're happy to, you know, respond later too, as more things come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we sent you guys some instructions via Chris before the weekend, and I'm just going to kind of quickly go over those before we start. So you guys are looking at, and Chris, you're going to have to jump in here and tell me if I'm correct or not. You guys have been planning to look at 2 sites, I believe, right, in your coursework?
Yes, that's right. The cul-de-sac area, and then the terminus of Fifth Avenue.
Awesome. So you guys have been planning to look at those sites and think about what could go there, right? And kind of what the future might look like on those sites. And were you looking at, you know, 20, 30-year horizons, or what were you specifically looking at?
I don't think we had a specific timeline in mind, but yeah, certainly sort of longer term, not trying to put anything together for within the next year or something like that. Okay.
So we wanted to provide an opportunity for your students to think about how public art may be integrated into the things that you guys were already thinking about and the sites that you were already thinking about. And so I understand that you're thinking about what private development may look like on those sites, maybe the density, right? Possibly some massing of kind of what's going on there, and the use, right?
Yes.
And then, you know, we wanted, because you guys were already so deep in those sites, to kind of add another layer. So how does public art fit into the things that you're already kind of dreaming up? So are you guys in teams? Are you guys doing individual exercises at these sites? How is that working?
I think given that everybody's sort of scattered around, there probably will be a few teams that want to work together, but most people will be doing some individual work. Cool. And we'll probably do some thinking about, you know, about land use. Certainly we have the comprehensive plan for Moline sort of lays out some guidelines. So we have you know, something to go on there. But then students, I think, are interested in connection to some of the trails and thinking about how can we make those connections. Awesome. Some stuff about streetscaping, and then a lot of our initial conversations have been around how to build public spaces, which maybe that's just because that's what I talk about in class.
Sure.
But that's really what we've been thinking about, sort of, and so some conversations about parks, and I do think students sort of independently were interested in public art for these spaces too.
Cool.
Okay. We haven't gotten too far.
Okay, great. Well, good. I'm glad we're coming in at the beginning so that public art's at the forefront of what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
I'm especially interested in you guys talking about how to connect with trails and maybe some parks in these locations. I think that's great. And the streetscape. That is becoming an ever more popular opportunity for public art that we're seeing in our work. So that's awesome. So what we're going to do is go to each site. So one site is not available on Google Street View, I guess, because it hasn't been updated, which is fine because it looks like Chris already sent out videos of that site, but I have a photograph. And what I'd like to do, if everyone's comfortable, you can unmute yourself and we'll just have a conversation about that site. Or if you prefer to type in the chat box, that's fine too. We'll make sure to pull those comments out so that we can all talk about it. But what we're interested primarily first, and we're going to go site by site. And the first site we're going to do is go to the New Bridge area. And what we'd like to talk about are what are your big ideas for the New Bridge area? So we can talk collectively about, what are those big ideas? So is it a park, all these different things. And then we're going to kind of narrow down our conversation into how public art can fit into those big ideas. And depending on how our conversation goes, I have some inspiration images that we may check out as we have our conversation, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to go ahead. I've also created a SurveyMonkey link, and I'm going to put it into the chat box here so that everyone can click on it. And you also received it in your email. But if you're someone who doesn't really like to talk out loud, that's fine. We're happy to just have you place your big ideas and any kind of comments here in the SurveyMonkey link. That's all coming to us, and we will be using that in our plan. But again, we would like to have a conversation. The more conversation, the better. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again so that I can find these photos. Just give me a second. I thought I had all these up. Okay. Here we go. All right. So, okay. All right. And you can see my screen, correct?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So the first place we're going to go to is the New Bridge site. So just so you all know what we're going to be doing, we're going to be taking notes while we're talking. And we'll also just be asking some questions. So let's talk broadly about what you guys have been thinking for this new site.
I guess I can pop in. So obviously, well, okay. I don't know why I have in my head like that we got 3 videos that Dr. Strunk uploaded that we watched over the weekend. And I don't know why I have in my head that all 3 sites should be something different, because I suppose maybe they don't have to be. But the larger of the 3, which was like the one on maybe the south side of the ramp that you were showing us, the first video that was in I'm still like learning the terms of them, I guess, but it would be cool to see like a park there, just because I think it's like a big enough space that maybe something could go there. And I remember a wall. I'm still trying to like familiarize myself with them and name them in my head, but which one was the wall, Dr. Strunk, where there was like with the on ramp or off ramp that was there?
It was on 21st Street, and that was on the north side of 6th Avenue. So we could really see the really nice sort of on ramp with some existing designs.
Yeah, they kind of put some, like, I don't want to say like brick or something. I don't know. They put some sort of wall. What do you call that? I don't know. They put
Like a
something
retaining
there.
wall, maybe?
Sorry?
Like a retaining wall, maybe?
Yeah, like just to keep it up, but it already has some sort of texture in it. So I don't know. I think maybe it could be cool to see that be painted. And it's like, I mean, you can walk right up to it. So again, like that's a place where you can take pictures and share them and that kind of thing. And then the other two sites, those were like kind of across the street from each other, right, Dr. Strunk? There was one that was a little bit smaller, and then there was a bigger one. And I thought, go ahead.
Oh, the first one I showed was that's sort of Fifth Avenue and where it ends on at the highway. Sorry?
Yeah, at 20th Street?
Yes, at 20th Street.
Okay.
And then the other two were right across from each other. And so one it was hard to get a sense of because it was totally under construction.
Right.
I couldn't even walk onto the site. Yeah. So sorry. Go ahead, Mia.
No, I was just in one of those spaces, and I think maybe it was the last one I was picturing. Maybe were the last two the one where you showed. Sorry, I have a kitten, and she needs babysitting. The second one or the third one that was by 7th Avenue, I was picturing, is that a cul-de-sac or going to be a cul-de-sac or no?
Yes. Yeah, it'll end in 6th, the other side of the street will end in 6th Avenue, and that'll be a cul-de-sac as well.
Okay, my initial idea for that then was like to do some sort of like cool structure kind of, and what Renew Moline was kind of, they kept saying was synonymous or kind of similar was like Cloudgate in Chicago, like the Bean, like something that people can go and like hang out around. But then I saw the turnabout that you also showed us just now with the cool, like, I don't know, almost looked like fabric-y kind of cloud thing above it, but it's colored. Doing something like that to get people to stay, because that was like another idea that I had when we met with Renew Moline, that people kind of go up to the Bean and they take a picture and they wander around for like 10 minutes tops, and then they're on to the next thing. They want to see something else. So they don't really stick around so long for things like the Bean. But yeah, those are just some ideas that I had, was like, I think a mural would be really cool, like to do some sort of big kind of painting, and also to have like a public space to hang out. If I'm looking at this right, Dr. Strunk, this image that's on the screen here, that bridge, so like that green one is the new one?
Yes.
And then the other one is the old one. So then that whole space where, you see the on-ramp there.
Yep.
Yeah, so that whole space could be made into like some sort of, maybe I guess some sort of park.
Yeah.
It's not too far from the river, so you can still get that kind of connection. Because Rock Island and Davenport both have pretty strong connections to the river, but Moline, I think, could use like something to, this is the river, we're on the river.
I know Wendy is on the call from Renew Moline. Wendy, this is one of the spaces that we are also considering, correct?
Hi there. Yes. That really probably will not be a park. Right now they're considering a park from the riverfront where the old bridge is. So that's River Drive going across there. So River Drive back to the river is under consideration for a park.
Okay.
The building right here, the Spiegel building, which is a prime development opportunity, the brick one in front of that, that the city is really working on. And this bigger area that the student pointed out will probably be some sort of development, not a park.
Okay.
A mixed use or housing, or it's, to be determined. But in preliminary talks, the park would be towards the riverfront.
So right here, aside from their access, so it would be here and then all the way probably to that property line, you think?
Yeah, probably. The building to the left side of the bridge is the city water department.
Okay.
So in between the water department and that white roofed building.
Okay. And Wendy, do we know the time that this bridge is going to be coming down? All of this infrastructure is going to be removed?
not really. You know, the
Okay.
timeline keeps moving. So after the new bridge is up. So
Sure. Okay. Those are great ideas, Mia. I really like those. Especially, I like the sentiment of encouraging people to stay. I think you're right about the cloud gate. When people are coming, taking their photo, and then they're leaving. I think it's interesting that you're thinking about how to get people to stay there. Anyone else have any ideas?
It looks like Josh has something in the comments, in the chat.
Josh says.
Sorry, I was muted. I was gonna, not me, Josh, but other Josh had a
Josh,
comment
sorry.
about something to do with the history of John Deere in Moline.
Yes.
And I think that's, we're always looking for kind of those community icons and historic stories to tell through public art. So I think in terms of content, that's a really interesting approach to, would be to do something that helps tell that story. And the cool thing about getting artists involved is that they can do that in ways that aren't necessarily so direct. So you might see opportunities to do some kind of public art piece that's not like an advertisement for John Deere, but might help tell the story of how that came to be, how, you know, and how the company evolved and how Moline evolved along with it.
Absolutely. And you should know that we did talk to Neil Dahlstrom, who is the archivist for John Deere. He has a lot of really awesome like historic advertisements and knowledge, but he was really psyched about this project. So absolutely, Josh, it's a really great idea. So one of the things we've asked you in the Survey Monkey that you'll see is, are there special considerations that we should be thinking about as we consider public art going in these different spaces? So, you know, like Wendy shared with us, there's going to be a park there, but one of the special considerations for that area should be, okay, well, when is the infrastructure coming down? Are there going to be environmental issues in this area? What kind of things should we be kind of future casting so that any artist or the city or any developer who's going to place something here, we can kind of be aware of those things as we look to the future. So that's important to understand too when you're thinking through how public art can be integrated in these sites. One of the other things that is unique about Moline is, you guys, the river floods so often. And so, you know, there are some regulations that FEMA places when you're thinking about putting new items in places that flood. Like, you know, what would happen if it were submerged? And so public artists who are going to be working on public art within a flood zone need to think about how their materials will weather, you know, is it 8 feet of water? Is it 20 feet of water? How long does the water stay? And using those different measures to inform their design process. So that's one of the things that need to be considered. Do you think there are other considerations that we should be thinking about in any of these sites?
Feel free to jump in, everybody, either on the chat or, oh, there's Natalia. Okay.
She says she kind of had the same idea as Josh, but maybe tying it back to the Native Americans. That's great. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the things that, as Amanda kind of mentioned in the presentation that she gave when she was touching on that piece about how Richmond and I don't know if you mentioned New York City, but there are several communities today that are looking at how they can use public art to help bolster representation of underrepresented people in the, you know, in the public realm. So New York has a whole commission on women, like is it called like the Women's Monument Commission or something? Because essentially all of the monuments in New York are, you know, are representative of men. So they're thinking, you know, how can we represent women? So I think not just, obviously Native American history is often overlooked in a lot of our places, particularly in the Midwest. And so I think any way to represent that, and then other folks who are, you know, historically underrepresented in our public realm, whether it be women or other, you know, ethnic or groups or any folks like that. So that's definitely a good idea.
Yeah. Wendy mentions for special consideration, thinking about what's underground. You know, this is an interesting question. We're working right now with an artist out of Brooklyn who his piece is actually in the right of way. So we did a project for a $25 million streetscape where they extended sidewalks, narrowed the street, added more parking, added more trees, but it was a big project. And as part of that, there was a $500,000 public art installation or public art dollars that were associated with it. But the restrictions were that the public art had to be within the right of way. So building to building in the air above, which, as you can imagine, creates some very serious constraints on the project, because what's underground, all of your streets, right? All the utilities are there, including traffic boxes and basement access to a lot of these buildings that are there. There's a lot of historic buildings and all brand new sidewalks. And so in that project in particular, the artist was selected, has done a really great job, and is now having issues with the utility company who owns the fiber optic cable because it's not publicly owned. And so his base for his piece is going to straddle the fiber optic cable and will be 6 inches on either side of the fiber optic cable. But because the city doesn't own that utility, he's having to get permission from a private owner to straddle it with 6 inches on either side. And that provider is being a little bit challenging. So absolutely, you have to think about what's underground, who owns what's underground, and what permissions and permits are going to be needed when you're seeking placement in those areas. And Chris says, particularly with our classes sites, how can we create strong connections to the commercial area on Fifth Avenue? Absolutely, Chris. That's a great idea, a great question. So Haas says, I remembered in our little trip to downtown Moline, Dr. Stunk talked about the history. I think we should consider other communities, Hispanic, absolutely, German, Polish, Swedish in the area as well, because they've been, they're creating Moline now. She totally agrees with Natalie about tying it back to the Native American history. Absolutely, Ha. Yeah, Moline has it's interesting. Moline has, I believe it's 40% Hispanic, correct? 30 to 40%. I'm pretty sure that's correct. Which is really interesting.
High. I think 20% might be more accurate. The Floreciente neighborhood is strongly Hispanic, but overall, I think it's about 20%.
Great. Yeah, and now that we're talking about the Floreciente neighborhood, I should also let you know that we did have a focus group with that neighborhood. Because we did want to make sure that those voices were represented, primarily because they border downtown. They're a prominent neighborhood that borders downtown, and they also have a lot of commercial activity that will support that side of downtown and any public art that's coming. So we are absolutely taking into consideration that community, that neighborhood, as it relates to downtown. So let's go back to Chris's comment about how we can create strong connections to the commercial area on Fifth. Let me actually go ahead and go to a different window here. And I'm going to show you just some inspiration images. So maybe it'll get us get our creative juices flowing. You're seeing my horrible filing system, so just don't look at it. I just had them up. I don't know where they went. Where are those posters at? Here we go. Okay. I'm gonna just kind of click. Can you guys see these images?
Yep.
Okay, I'm just gonna kind of click through just quickly, so maybe you can get a little bit more inspiration to think about how you can create some connections. That's way too small. These are interesting too, some of these nighttime images. They're very interesting because oftentimes in our communities, we have downtowns that are alive during the day with businesses, but not all the time at night. And we know that we need activity in our cities at night to feed restaurants at night, but we need restaurants at night to feed activity, right? So which comes first? And so some of these installations that are brought to life through light are really interesting. And really do provide a great opportunity to continue to engage the community at times when they're not usually there. There's the entrance to that Birmingham underpass. Sorry, Josh, what were you saying?
No, I was just going to mention that the image before this, Amanda and I were able to, this installation was brought to Columbus, the previous image. And it's interesting because it was at a paid venue and we went in the middle of the winter. I mean, it was, 30 degrees outside. And there were still, I mean, there weren't this many people, but there were still a significant number of people and a lot of adults interacting with this, not just kids.
And not just 30-year-old adults, like 60-year-old adults.
Yeah, it was entire families, grandparents. And of course we went in winter, so a lot of folks were like with their families. But it was just interesting to see how engaging something like this really can be, to pull people out and have them interact. And I think a lot of people might just say, oh, I'll take my kids, which is, good to have opportunities for kids, but we're looking to engage with more than just children. So the fact that that can kind of be the thing that draws people in and then they themselves engage in it as well. We hear this all the time. I was doing an interview with some city council members of the city we're working in Florida, and they were like, oh, we're not art. The one woman was like, I'm not an art person. And then I just started asking her a few questions. And then she just went on like a 20-minute discussion about like this art that she saw and how she liked it and what she'd like to see more of. And after she was done, I said, I thought you weren't an art person. And she's like, well, I'm not, but okay, yeah. So it's a lot of times you just kind of need to get people into it a little bit, and then they understand it very quickly and want to see more. So that's a good thing. Sorry, speaking of ranting, but go on.
So that's great. I'll just quickly, anybody else have anything they want to say? I'll just keep clicking through these images if you're still interested in having some inspiration. I think this is really interesting. This community, and I can't, it says False Creek Ferries. This community, these are actually flood lines. And so they've kind of commemorated where different flooding heights have happened, which is very applicable to you all. Love that. Fun. I also am a super fan of the Lego Bridge. Dog park. Some different ways to engage the columns. Lights again. There's Terry Allen's piece. Great. So there's all kinds of ways to, create opportunities for things. I think that's fun. On top of the bridge, we've been talking a lot about the underpass, but that's on top on the overpass. And that's it. Does that inspire anybody else to share some more ideas? That's okay. If you guys do suddenly get a streak of inspiration, you have the survey link, and we would love for you just to kind of jot down your ideas. Again, the second question on there does ask for you guys to think about what considerations should be made for each site. That's a really important question for us, because we want to know, and we want you to start thinking as planners and people who are thinking about public space. You can't just say, great, this park's going to go here. There have to be other considerations that you're thinking about, because there are always going to be issues that you're going to have to work through. And unfortunately, many of the issues you can't anticipate. We find that out too frequently. So, are there any general questions that you'd like to ask us about public art, about this process, anything? You guys are very talkative. I can hardly keep up.
So what I'm going to do is I will upload this. Well, we have a question, but just to reiterate, I'm going to upload this to YouTube, to our YouTube channel, and then I'll send you the link. And if there's questions, you can comment on the YouTube channel too, as you or other students watch this again, and we will answer those. And then also, you can shoot us an email, and I'll say my email for folks in the video too. So my email is josh@designinglocal.com, and Amanda's is amanda@designinglocal.com. Fairly simple.
Yes.
I guess I have a question. So you mentioned you're going to work with local artists.
Mm-hmm.
Do you identify those artists ahead of time, or is that something that's just sort of in the master plan that you put together, that Moline should be sort of choosing those artists?
That's a great question. So it's our philosophy that the city should be putting out calls and artists should respond, because you can't anticipate that the perfect artist for each project. And it's important that there's representation when selecting who the artist is going to be for each project. So when the city puts out a call, we usually request that they do a request for qualifications, and then the artists are sending in images of their work. The artists are saying, here's what I can do, here's what I have done. They send their resume. And then whoever the selection committee is will kind of whittle that down to 2, 3, 4, 5 artists. And then those artists are actually paid to create proposals, because again, this is about making sure that artists are paid for their value. And so those artists will then create proposals, and then that selection committee will come back together, and the artist, we usually recommend, will have the opportunity to present their ideas to that selection committee. One, because you can only see so much when you're looking at a piece of paper of a proposal, but you can really hear the passion and ideas and all the energy that went into creating those proposals. And so that's kind of how we recommend it's done. Sometimes we do know that the public needs to be involved sometimes and needs to see those presentations. And so we always recommend that those presentations are public, that people can come to them. Sometimes there's a public comment period. It just really depends what the city's interested in doing in particular.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one other question, although, students, if you have stuff you want to ask, please cut me off.
Yeah.
But what kind of ideas do you have for online engagement? Obviously, Zoom is a potential format for us. We are hoping to develop some ideas and then at least do some engagement, before the semester is over on some ideas, just so we can get a sense of what the planning process is like. But what do you think works? What doesn't work?
Amanda, so I've been doing some engagement, obviously our work-based engagement, but also have been doing some engagement for a nonprofit that I'm the board chair of. And I think it really is going to depend on who your audience is and what your goal is. If it's a smaller group like this one, I think we have 16 participants in here. That, you know, this kind of Zoom or even a Google Hangout can work. Just there are like some process things around what works and what doesn't. If you do a Google Hangout, which is what we were using before, one of the problems is that you can't, the presenter has no control over like muting people or anything like that. And then people can get confused because, especially if they call in, they can't, like if I mute them, they have to press *6 to unmute themselves. And so just from a process standpoint, like Zoom or other video conferencing services like this work well if you're trying to engage a group of like, let's say 20 or so. Maybe even more if you think you're going to have people that are going to be considerate when they're participating, because that is one of the issues. I would say if you're looking to do more kind of like you just want to do get feedback from a larger group of people in the public, Facebook Live can work really well. If you're trying to do it like Zoom, the reason why Zoom is getting so much business is you can feed that directly into Facebook Live. And then you can be getting, you know, people's comments on Facebook and answering them live. And then that can live on and you can answer questions there as well long term. And people can kind of just pay a little bit more attention. Google Hangouts also has a live stream. I haven't yet been able to get it to work. I'm sure you can, I think that you can use YouTube to live stream. But, you know, you really have to focus on what your audience is going to be, and then you know, do some research and use whatever tool is going to be best suited to that. I think this kind of format has worked the best we've done so far. I mean, everybody's learning, so everybody's getting some leeway in this kind of thing. And I personally anticipate with everybody getting used to doing this, we're probably going to see more of this in the future, even if we're not, you know, even when we don't have to. Amanda, you have other thoughts on?
No, actually, I was just going to share. Did you say that you did happy hours, Josh?
Oh yeah. So what I've been doing is I can tell you a little bit about what we're actually doing. You're planners too. So I'm the chair of a transit advocacy group. So we've been doing happy hours from home. And we tried several different, like we had one total fail because just the technology is confusing, or it can be. But what we've been most successful with is doing these Facebook Live happy hours. And since there's two, myself and my vice chair of the board have been doing them on Zoom, where you can have two screens on there. And people are, you know, we had a lot of participants. I would say we had like at any given time 20 to 30 people tune into it, and then we had hundreds of comments where people were asking questions and engaging with one another, mostly people that we know or that have participated in stuff. But it's just a really good opportunity for people to, you know, blow off some steam and have some talk of things that aren't COVID-19, but that they want to talk about. We had a lot of people told us when we tried to do something more like this, where people were actually talking, that they would rather have it like playing while they're doing something else, and they can listen and participate. I've also been doing, you know, we've been doing like book clubs using Zoom, and just kind of groups of folks getting together like this. I know a lot of people are all around the country. So I think this kind of engagement opportunity is, you know, in some ways it's even easier for people because they can do it from home and they don't have to feel like, oh, I gotta like go wherever I'm gonna go to participate. And, you know, I found that in some ways it's like easier to get everybody together doing this. You know, you only have to wear a nice shirt on the top. You can wear sweatpants. So yeah, so it's definitely do your research before you do it. But I think there's, you know, there's lots of opportunities, and I think we see more things coming out every day. So you gotta always stay tuned and do your research. But there's lots of opportunities.
Thanks. That's great. Great for us to think about.
Well, as we said, anything else that you guys have questions about or want to talk about, feel free to send us emails. And we really would appreciate if you took the survey link about each of the sites so that we can have that information. But we also want you to go and take the full project survey and share that with your friends. Again, our plans are only as good as our input. And so if we have a bunch of input from young people who really do have a lot of really great ideas, then that's what the plan is going to look like. If we have a bunch of input from people who just love bronze sculptures, that might be what's in there. No, I'm just kidding. But the input is really important. So we really do want you to take the survey and share it with your friends and anyone else who you think would be interested. So
Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you.